Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the WOW History Channel. My name is Ron Guth, and each week I try to bring you a historical topic that hopefully will be something you didn't learn in school, or perhaps even make you say, wow, that's not the way it was taught to me. This is a bonus video for this week. I'll be posting a regular video on Sunday just like I normally do, so you can look forward to that. But this is one that popped up in my head the other day, and I figured, let's put it out there. For a long time, I was mixed up about when the American Revolutionary War actually started, and that's the topic of today's video. For some reason, I thought that it didn't start until the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, and everything else came after that. The Boston Massacre, the Tea Party, the Battle of Lexington-Concord, all these things that are associated with the Revolution, but I thought occurred afterwards. Well, that's actually not the case. It's the complete opposite. The Declaration of Independence was actually the culmination of a series of events and the war had actually already started. So let's look at a little bit of background. Why were the colonists so upset with Britain that they revolted? Why were they so angry that they wanted to throw off the mother country? It all began with the French and Indian War that took place between 1756 and 1763. That's because it's a 7-year period. It's also known as the 7 Years' War. Now, Great Britain was the victor in this war, and because of it, they acquired they acquired land that became much of the original 13 colonies. They also got Florida from Spain, and they got Canada from France. The cost of defeating the French in the 7 Years' War was actually quite high. The British had paid Prussian mercenaries to fight on their side, and they had also paid colonists to fight the war for them in the colonies. So they needed money, and they figured one of the best ways to do that was to tax the people who had benefited the most from this victory over the French. And they decided to levy taxes upon the British colonists. One of the first ways they did this was to enact the Stamp Act of 1765. And a Stamp Act was basically every piece of paper, every document, every newspaper, anything published in the colonies had to bear an official stamp, and they had tax collectors that went around and collected the stamp. And it was a small amount of money, a pence per paper. Some of them were 5 pence, 6 pence. You'll see these things. And the colonists said, no way, we're not going to pay this tax. We're opposed to it. And this is where the phrase taxation without representation came about. The British colonists had no representation in Parliament. So they said, we might be willing to pay this tax, but without representation, absolutely no, we're not going to pay this tax. So they revolted, they boycotted, they did the normal things that people do when they see something unfair. They protested. And so the Stamp Act was repealed in 1766, just a year later. So was the Stamp Act the beginning of the Revolutionary War? No, but it was certainly a factor that led up to it. The next tax scheme was enacted by the British Parliament in 1767, and these are known as the Townshend Acts. And in these taxes, they decided to go after items that the British colonists could not make themselves. And this would be things like glass, paint, lead, fine china, and most importantly, tea. The British colonists, being British, they loved their tea, and that was the one thing they could not grow in the colonies, and if they wanted tea, they had to pay the tax on it. Well, of course, they revolted, protested, and boycotted all of these goods, and as a result, the taxes really had little effect except on tea. Well, because of the protests and the revolts and everything that was going on, the boycotts, the British decided to send 2,000 troops into Boston in 1770. This was a huge number of troops when you think that there were only 16,000 people living in Boston at the time. So 2,000 soldiers mixed among 16,000 Bostonians, and you can imagine the trouble that started. The very presence of British soldiers in Boston created all kinds of tension between the colonists and the soldiers. And it came to a head on the night of March 5th, 1770, when a small band of colonists confronted some British soldiers. Shots were fired, and 5 of the colonists were killed, including Crispus Attucks, who was the first African American killed in the Revolutionary War. And this was dubbed, or called thereafter, the Boston Massacre. The Townshend Acts were also reviled because the money that was raised by those acts was actually used to pay for the colonial legislatures and magistrates and officers. And the colonists felt like, hey, this was Britain's way of controlling their own government, controlling who was in office and, what their philosophy was toward the British government. So the colonists didn't like that. The Townshend Acts ended up being repealed in 1770 for all goods except for tea. Then came the Tea Act of 1773. The Tea Act was not meant to raise money to help pay for the 7 Years' War or to fund the colonial legislatures. Its express purpose was to bail out the East India Company, which was the big company that was transporting tea back and forth from Asia to England, then to the colonies, and back and forth. And because of the boycotting that was done in America, instead of using English tea and paying the taxes, they got around it by importing Dutch tea, which was cheaper, not taxed, but not as good. So the East India Company was having trouble financially because of the boycott of the tea. But they were still, running their trade, and the purpose of the Tea Act was to help raise money to save them. On a cold night of December 16th, 1773, Sam Adams and a band of colonists dressed up as Native Americans, and they dumped the tea from 3 boats into the Boston Harbor, and that is known today as the Tea Party. Now, was the Tea Party the beginning of the American Revolutionary War? No, it was a very upsetting thing to the British. They were shocked that the colonists would behave in this way, but this again was not the beginning of the war. In response to the Tea Party, the British government passed what are known as the Coercive Acts in 1774, and these were basically a punishment to the colonists in the Massachusetts colony. The Coercive Acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts, because that was a reaction of the colonists, basically took away the colonial charter of Massachusetts. It closed the port of Boston until the colonists reimbursed the government for the cost of the tea that was destroyed. There were also other acts in there, like the Quartering Act, which said that the colonists had to provide housing for the British troops that were stationed there. And so it just kept escalating and escalating and getting worse and worse, and the reaction of the colonists became firmer and firmer in opposition. This all came to a head in the Battle of Lexington-Concord in 1775, and that's when American colonists in a guerrilla warfare killed a number of British soldiers as they were trying to come and capture a cache of weapons that were being held in that area. Now, this was the real beginning of the Revolutionary War. Now, all of a sudden, British soldiers had been killed by American colonists. It was okay if they shot colonists in the Boston Massacre, but not for the colonists to shoot them in Lexington and Concord. Shortly thereafter, on July 4th, 1776, the American colonists signed the Declaration of Independence, which was a point of no return. There was not going to be any going back from that. That was a slap in the face to the British king, and the British Empire knew that they were going to have a fight on their hands. I hope this video gave you a better understanding of the timeline of the American Revolution and how there was actually a logical progression from the French and Indian War to the American Revolutionary War. And there was a lot that went on in between. It is almost as if it was inevitable with the misunderstandings, the indignities on both sides, the miscalculations. So it's pretty clear that the colonists had a burning desire to be free, Maybe they used some of these things as excuses, but they were certainly justified. And fortunately, they won that war, and America is the country it is today, thanks to their bravery and direct action. Thank you, as always, for watching this video. If you like watching videos about American history and history in general, please hit the subscribe button. This will help me with YouTube's algorithm. Also hit the like button and the notification button if you want to be notified each time I upload a new video. And again, thanks for just participating. Some of you have become regular viewers, and I really appreciate all of you. Thank you.